Are you ready for the word?
Yes, sir.
Turn to Exodus 12. Shabbat Shalom. Good to see you. Verse 1. And Yahweh spoke unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. Don't you think it's strange that a person can own a Bible for most of their entire life? They can read it regularly. They can have weekly classes where it gets taught. They can go to weekly assemblies where someone preaches a message that's based on the Bible that they own. They can believe with all of their heart that it's inspired and that it is the inerrant living word of Yahweh. They can profess that their faith is based on what's written within the pages of that Bible, and yet never know that Yahweh has His very own calendar. It's not just mentioned here. It's mentioned in numerous places throughout the Bible. And yet most people who say they worship Him and believe the Bible do not know there is a calendar that He expects us to know about and to follow. I was such a person. Lived most of my adult life without knowing it was there. And yet read the Bible, was taught the Bible, listened to sermons on the Bible, listened to tapes on the Bible, and even taught and preached the Bible myself. The fact that most people don't know that Yahweh has a calendar and that He expects us to know about it and to follow it, that fact not only reveals how biblically illiterate that we can sometimes be, I think it also reveals how powerfully deceptive that Satan can be. His powers of deception exceed our ability to comprehend. It's hard for us to comprehend how powerful he is at deceiving people. If you think you can imagine how deceptive he is, take that thought and multiply it 70 times 7. Because his powers of deception are exceedingly great. All I need to say to prove my point is to remind you of what I just said. People who have owned Bibles their entire lives, have read them and been taught them and read books about their Bibles, heard sermons about their Bibles, who believe that the Bible is the inspired word of Yahweh, do not know that He established a calendar and He expects us to know about it and to follow it. And if you were to tell people that, they would say, if you were to tell people Yahweh has a calendar and He expects us to know about it and to follow it, their response would be, really? I've never seen it there. Would you show it to me? Would not be their response. Would you make it known to me? Would not be their response. This reveals to us how powerfully deceptive that Satan is. Satan's powers of deception are incomprehensible. Or to put it another way, he's really, really good at what he does. Which, when you stop and think about it, it's really a sad commentary on how little we pay attention to the Bibles we own and read. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Here's what I mean. If we truly paid attention to what we read in our Bibles, we would have been made aware very early in our reading of our Bible of a subtle beast who was introduced to us in the beginning of the 3rd chapter, and we would be constantly alert and prepared for him and his tactics. Let me say that again. Owning a Bible, if we would have paid attention to it when we read it, very early on, we would have been alarmed by a warning that we were given in the 3rd chapter about a subtle beast who came in to deceive, and we would have been on the lookout for this subtle beast. But somehow we read right over the 3rd chapter of our Bibles, And we weren't even the least bit alarmed about what we read. Instead, we read the 3rd chapter of Genesis and we make jokes about that woman eating an apple that she was never supposed to eat. Had we taken our Bible seriously, we would have read and we would have marked that the very Bible we say we want to follow begins by warning us about a character with some very descriptive terms. We're told that he was, in Genesis 3, more subtle than any beast ever created. And then we're told that the first words this character ever spoke were these words, "Yea, has Elohim said." Now that's how he's introduced to us in the 3rd chapter of Genesis. He's introduced as the most subtle beast ever created, and we're told that his first words were to question what Yahweh had said. And then he followed all of that up by telling that woman an out-and-out lie. Do you know what subtle means? Anybody? What does the word subtle mean?
Slick.
Veiled.
Wait a minute, say again. What'd you say?
Slick.
Slick. Veiled. True. If you look it up, the word in Strong's, I think, given for the definition of the word subtle is the word cunning. The Hebrew word, the Hebrew word translated subtle, according to Strong's, means cunning. Do you know what cunning means? Slick and veiled would be good definitions of that word cunning. Here's what the dictionary says cunning means. Cunning means to be very skilled at achieving a goal by means of deception. Very skilled at achieving a goal by deception. So this character introduced to us in the opening lines of the 3rd chapter of Genesis in our Bible, we're warned that he is the most skilled deceiver ever to exist. In case you've never noted that before, you need to make a note of it now, at least in your mind. Genesis 3 tells us that this character, this beast, is the most skilled deceiver ever to exist. He's not just pretty good at it. He's not all right at it. His skill at deceiving people, we're told in the very 57th verse of our Bibles, his skill at deceiving people is off the charts. Just 57 verses in, and we're warned about his skill to deceive. And then, only 57 verses into reading the book that we say our faith is based on, we read that his first words spoken to a human being were, "Yea, has Elohim said." So we're given a behind-the-curtain look at how this skilled deceiver worked. He gets people to ignore or to reject or to question things that Yahweh said. Now let that sink in. Our Bible tells us, right there in the beginning of it, that there is a very powerful spiritual entity at work who wants to deceive us, and we're told that he is more skilled at doing that than any living creature. And we're told that his craft hinges on his ability to get people to question and then to reject things that Yahweh said. We're told exactly how he has so much success. And we see in Genesis 3 that his very first attempt to do this did not fail. He went into a perfect environment. He went to a woman who had a very intimate relationship with Yahweh, who was very aware of what Yahweh had said, and he set out to deceive her into committing an act of disobedience in the very beginning of our Bible. Now I want to back up, and I want you to, if you would, with me for just a moment. Let's imagine that we've never heard the story of Genesis 3. Just put it out of your mind and imagine you had never heard it. And let's imagine that somebody was telling you the story of Genesis 1 and 2 for the very first time. And they talked about the Creator of the heavens and the earth, who with magnificence and power and glory began to speak into existence everything that now is. And he said, let there be light, and there was light. And he said, and he created everything that is. And not only creating everything, he created every living thing, every beast, every animal, every bird, every fish. And then having created it all, he said, let us make man in our own image. And he took the dust of the ground and he breathed into it, and man became a living soul. And then when he had created man, he said, well, it's not right for him to be alone. And he created for him a helper. And he took this man and this woman and he set them up and he said, listen, look at everything that I created by the power of my word. I'm giving you dominion over every bit of it. You have dominion over it all. And he takes them and he sets them in a garden that is absolute perfection and tells them to tend it and to take care of it. Now that's the story you've heard for the very first time in your life. And then the storyteller says to you, but there was this subtle creature who came right after Yahweh had done all of that and tried to deceive the woman into not believing what the one who had created her and set her in that place, to not believe what he had said to her. If you were hearing that woman for the very first time, or hearing that story for the very first time, would you dare to believe she could be deceived into doing that? It's ludicrous, actually. It's unimaginable to believe that she could be deceived into not believing what the one who had created her and put her in that perfect paradise place, that she could be deceived into not believing what her Creator had said to her. That ought to awaken us to how skilled the Satan is at deceiving people. He went into that place of perfection to a woman who had intimate knowledge and a relationship with Yahweh, and deceived her into believing she ought to disobey him. That's skill. That's powerful deception. It almost, when you read the 3rd chapter of Genesis, it almost looks too easy. In chapter 3, verse 1, he starts in with his deception. And by verse 6, it's over. It didn't take days and days and days, weeks and weeks and weeks, chapters and chapters and chapters. He started in verse 1, and by verse 6, it's over. He accomplished his task. He accomplished his goal. And here we are, some 6,000 years later, and this highly skilled deceiver is still deceiving. And his tactics have not changed at all. Yeshua often spoke of how skilled and successful this beast was at what he does. In Matthew chapter 7, he spoke of 2 gates and 2 ways. And he said there was one gate that was wide, and the way was wide, and it led to destruction. And there was another gate that was narrow, and the way was straight, and it led to life. And he said, many will follow the path to destruction. And few will even find the gate in the narrow path that leads to life. What's he telling you? What's he telling us? He's telling us how powerful the deceptive skill of the Satan really is. And then in Matthew 7, Yeshua said that in the final judgment, many will be so deceived that at the final judgment, they will protest that they lived their life serving the Messiah. And he will confess, I don't even know who y'all are. They were so deceived, not a few, not a remnant, but many were so deceived, they thought they were serving someone who didn't even know them. They were so deceived, they thought that the best way they could serve him would be by breaking the commandments of Yahweh. He's skilled at what he does. That's a powerful, powerful deceiver. He gets people to believe that Yeshua would want them to disobey what Yahweh said. Well, throughout history, there's always been a remnant who were the true servants of Yahweh. They were hated, they were despised, they were imprisoned, they were tortured and killed by the majority. The flood speaks of how powerful Satan is at deceiving mankind. The destruction of Sodom speaks of how powerful Satan is at deceiving mankind. And the descriptions of the end times speaks of how powerful Satan is at still deceiving mankind. The description tells us that the deception will be so strong that the remnant who remains true to Yahweh will have to be rescued by Yeshua returning to take them, to protect them. The prophets of Yahweh, these are the ones who Yahweh sends to speak on his behalf. When I say prophet, that's what I want you to hear. Ones who are sent to speak on Yahweh's behalf. The prophets of Yahweh were hated, despised, tortured, and killed throughout history. Satan is so powerful at deceiving mankind that the majority, hear that word now, the majority listen to and follow Satan's prophets and kill Yahweh's prophets. The majority are so deceived that they listen to the ministers that Satan promotes, and they kill the prophets that Yahweh sends. That's powerful deception. His spirit of deception is so strong, people believe that the liars are telling the truth, and they believe that the ones who are speaking the truth have to be telling lies. Peter said it this way, the way of truth is evil spoken of, or the way of truth is vilified. If I were to tell you that my yard has a bad infestation of ticks, and that it's very probable that when you walk through my yard, ticks got on you, that we've had a big problem with ticks in our yard. If I were to tell you that it's very probable when you went through my yard, you got ticks on you, every one of you would examine yourself. Right. The least little twitch you felt, you would think there was one on you. Right. You would check every place you could possibly check. You would find someone that you know and love and have them check places you can't see. Hey, look right there. Is that a tick? And if you love somebody, you would help check them. Right? Listen, we live here on this farm. We've done it. In the summertime, you walk through my yard, you go out in my garden, you walk through the woods, you better learn to check yourself for ticks. It's very probable you're going to get one on you. People can read, see, and hear about how powerful a deceiver Satan is. We're told he's the most skilled deceiver ever to exist, and records show over and over and over that he is successful at deceiving not just a few, but successful at deceiving the majority of the people, deceiving many. We see it over and over again in our Bible, and yet people are reluctant to examine themselves and what they believe. It makes no sense. It would be stupid to think, well, yeah, I walked through Steve's yard in August, but I just don't believe a tick would get on me. That'd be stupid. And it's just as stupid to think, well, Satan might have deceived everybody else into believing lies, but I don't believe he could ever deceive me into believing a lie. If you've ever spent time in a church, if you ever went to a Bible study, if you ever listened to a cassette tape or a CD, or listened to a YouTube or a Facebook teaching, it would be wise to check yourself for ticks of deception.
Amen.
You remember how Paul praised the people of Berea? He said the Bereans were more noble than those of Thessalonica. Do you know why he said they were more noble? They did what? They searched the Scriptures daily. For what purpose? To see if his words were true. They had Paul telling them one thing. They had their pastors and teachers and prophets and priests telling them another thing. They didn't say, well, this is what we've always believed, so he must be lying. My parents wouldn't have been wrong. My grandparents wouldn't be wrong. And while they've devoted their whole life to studying the Bible, they must be telling me the truth. It's not what they did. They heard what Paul said, and they heard what these folks said, and they went to check it out in the Scriptures. Let's see who's telling us the truth. And what was their measuring stick? Torah. Searching the Scriptures was the answer, but you have to understand that searching the Scriptures daily is not enough if you don't know how to search the Scriptures. The deceived love to quote the Bible to back up deceived beliefs. The deceived use the Bible to confirm their right to believe the deceived belief that they have. So searching the Scriptures daily is not enough if you don't know how to search the Scriptures. Let's look at a perfect example. Go to Matthew 5. You tell somebody that they've been lied to all of their lives about the law, that if they were told that it passed away, somebody deceived them and lied to them. And if you tell them that as followers of the Messiah, we are to walk in obedience to Torah, what's the first thing they'll do? The first thing they'll do is quote the Bible. And Matthew 5 is one of the places they'll quote. Verse 17, think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say to you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law, till all be fulfilled. Whosoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments and shall teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. This is a perfect illustration of how powerful deception can be and is. Look at verse 17. When you are deceived, Satan has taught you to ignore the first part of that verse and to twist the second part. The first part says, do not think I came to destroy the law. The second part says, I am not come to destroy but to fulfill. Satan deceives men into ignoring the first statement. They'll read that verse and they will say, well, Yeshua did away with the law. See it right there in verse 17. And they'll twist the word fulfill to make it seem that it means to abolish or to do away with. When the word fulfill means to fully do or to fully preach. The word fulfill means to verify, to execute it, to practice it, or to satisfy it. So Yeshua said, do not think that I came to destroy Torah. I did not come to destroy it, but I came to fully preach it. I came to fully do it. I came to satisfy it, to practice it, to verify it, to execute it. And the deceived read that and somehow come up with the idea, well, verse 17 says he did away with it. Now, all you have to do to find out if he expects us to do the same thing he said he was going to do is read the next couple of verses. He said he was going to practice the law fully. Does he expect us to do the same? Well, let's read verse 18. He said that all of Torah will stand as long as heaven and earth stands. So all you got to do to find out if he wants us to do what he did, which was keep Torah, is look outside. Is heaven still in place? And is the earth still under your feet? He said, as long as there's heaven and long as there's earth, every jot and every tittle of the law stands. Then in verse 19, he said, whoever breaks the least commandment and teaches others to do so is called least in the kingdom of heaven. Now notice in verse 19, he didn't say, whoever breaks the least commandment up until the time that I'm crucified and resurrected. This is a blanket statement covering all of time, from the beginning to the end. Whoever breaks the least commandment and teaches others to do so is called least in the kingdom of heaven. Let me explain to you what that means. A person looks at Torah and says, that law in Torah is insignificant, and I don't think I have to keep it, and so therefore I don't think I will keep it. And then turns to others and says, I don't think you have to keep it, and I don't think you should keep it. Yeshua said when a person does that, looks at a law and says, that's too insignificant to matter to me, I'm not going to do it, that the kingdom of heaven looks at that person and says, you, sir, are insignificant. That's what that verse means. When a person looks at Torah and says any part of it is insignificant, the kingdom of heaven looks at that person and says they are insignificant. If we don't like that, take it up with Yeshua. He's the one that said it. Here's my point. When the Bible speaks of the Bereans searching the Scripture daily to see if those things Paul preached were true, it does not mean that they went to their favorite Bible verse to twist it so that they didn't have to change their mind about what they believed. It means that they listened to Paul and it challenged what they believed, and they went to Torah to find out if he was telling them the truth or not. And that's what we also must do. The only way to know if Satan has deceived a person is for that person to check what they believe against Torah. There's no other way. I feel like I need to explain that. Why do we have to check ourselves against Torah? Why not against Matthew? Why not against Luke? Why not against Galatians? Why do I have to check what I believe against Torah? Let me give you a couple of reasons. Number one, Torah is declared to be truth over and over and over again. Torah is declared to be truth. Number two, Torah was spoken directly from Yahweh to Moses. Directly. Not by dreams, not by visions, but directly. Go to Numbers 12. Exodus 33, go to Numbers 12, but Exodus 33 says that Yahweh would descend in a cloud and he would talk to Moses face to face as if a man were speaking to his friend. In Numbers 12, they watched Moses go into the tabernacle. The people would see Yahweh descend in a cloud, and their description of what they saw was this: Yahweh comes down and meets with Moses and speaks to him face to face. That's an awesome description. In Numbers 12, Miriam and Aaron got aggravated at Moses. Decided he wasn't really all that special. So let's read what happened. Verse 1. And Miriam and Aaron spake against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married. How could he be holy if he married that woman? For he had married an Ethiopian woman. So their criticism of him is accurate. It's true. He did what they said he did. Verse 2. And they said, has Yahweh indeed spoken only by Moses? Has he not spoken also by us? He had spoken by Miriam and he had spoken by Aaron. Verse 2, last part. And Yahweh heard it. Yahweh heard what Miriam said. Yahweh heard what Aaron said. Now the man Moses was very meek, above all the men which were upon the face of the earth. And Yahweh spake suddenly unto Moses and unto Aaron and unto Miriam. Come out, ye three, unto the tabernacle of the congregation. And they three came out. And Yahweh came down in the pillar of the cloud and stood in the door of the tabernacle and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both came forth. And he said, hear now my words. If there be a prophet among you, I, Yahweh, will make myself known unto him in a vision. I'll speak to him in a dream. My servant Moses is not so, who is faithful in all my house. With him will I speak mouth to mouth, even apparently, and not in dark speeches. And the similitude of Yahweh shall he behold. Wherefore then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? And the anger of Yahweh was kindled against them, and he departed. This is Yahweh's testimony of Moses and how he communicated with him. He said, I don't speak to him in dreams. I don't speak to him in Moses or dreams. I don't speak to him in visions. When I want to say something to Moses, I appear to him in a similitude, and I talk to him mouth to mouth. So why should we check what we believe against Torah? Because it's declared to be the truth over and over, and because Torah was spoke directly from Yahweh to Moses. A third reason is because Yeshua said that it will stand as long as heaven and earth stand. He was talking about Torah when he said it will always stand. The fourth reason we ought to check it against Torah is Deuteronomy 13 warns that there will be prophets who will arise, and they'll work great signs and they'll work great wonders for the purpose of pulling people away from Yahweh and away from Torah. Yahweh says, you stay true to what I've written. There's your measuring stick. Just because they've had a sign take place, just because they've worked a miracle, because they said something and it came to pass, just because they did any number of signs in front of you, if they try to pull you away from Torah, don't you reject Torah, you reject them. The only way to test ourselves against deception, to find those ticks and get them out of our life, the only way to do that is by searching and checking ourselves against Torah. So, in closing, I want to run just a few sample tests. Let's go back to our original text, Exodus 12. Yahweh spake unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, this month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. When does the new year start? If a person says, oh, it doesn't really matter when it starts, they have just uttered the words of a deceived heart. It does matter. Are our Yahweh would have never established when it starts. Do you remember earlier when I defined the word subtle? And had you helped me define the word subtle, and I said it means cunning. And I said cunning means to have great skill at achieving one's goal through deception. So if Satan is deceiving, what's his goal? He's got great skill at deceiving, which means he's got great skill at achieving a goal through that deception. What is his goal? His ultimate goal is not just to have a bunch of deceived people running around. His ultimate goal is to be worshiped as a god. So let's see how that plays out. Because he always starts off innocently. People don't realize that's what he's trying to do, is get them to worship him. He starts off innocently. Let's go back to Exodus 12 here. What he'll do is he'll try to get a person to ignore Exodus 12. He hopes that a person never discovers what it says. He hopes that people can read their Bible and never comprehend it. That people can read their Bible and just read right over stuff. Right? They read their Bibles trying to find a principle to apply to their life instead of reading their Bible to see what the Bible actually says. So he hopes that people never know what it says. If they do discover what it says, he'll then try to trivialize it so that they think it's unimportant, insignificant, or that it was meant for someone else and not for them. Now, once he has done that, then without them even knowing what he has done, he will use that commandment, that instruction, teaching them to ignore it and reject it. He'll use that to separate them from Yahweh and draw that person to himself. Follow me now. Exodus 12 is our example. By trivializing what Exodus 12 says about the first month of the new year, by getting people to trivialize that, he'll separate them from Yahweh. Because you see, not only does Yahweh establish when a new year begins, but by establishing when a new year begins, he's able to establish when all of his other appointed times through the year will be. So if a person doesn't know when the first day of the first month of the year is, then they have no way of knowing when the other appointed holy times of the year will come. And so by getting somebody to trivialize Exodus 12 being the beginning of a year, Satan separates people from Yahweh and has them completely oblivious to all of the other appointed times. Holy appointed times that are going to come about. Next, because Satan began trivializing the biblical new year, he then can get a person to accept another day of the year as being the first day of the year. Without most people even knowing what he did, he draws people to himself, and they begin to do things that are associated with the worship of him and his fellow fallen angels. He and the other fallen angels are B'nai Ha-Elohim, according to Genesis 6. They are the sons of God, fallen sons of God. They are the ones who the Babylonians established as being gods, the manifestation of these B'nai Ha-Elohim, these sons of God. The Babylonians did not just make up their gods in their imaginations. Their gods were real entities. They were either the manifestation of the B'nai Ha-Elohim, or they were the hybrid offspring produced according to Genesis 6 and after. Associated with these B'nai Ha-Elohim, who are worshipped as gods, are rites and rituals. the Babylonians began to have fellowship with these B'nai Ha-Elohim, with these fallen angels and their hybrid reproductions, their hybrid productions. The Babylonians began to have fellowship with these things. And they began to worship these things as gods. And these entities required certain rites and rituals in their worship. So if Satan can draw a person away from Torah, draw a person away from Yahweh, he can get them to unknowingly participate in activities that honor him and his other fellow fallen angels. Let's talk just for a moment about the calendar. Do you know what October means? Anybody? Anybody know Latin? There you go, octopus. October comes from the Latin word meaning 8, the 8th month. So you want to take a wild guess now what the word November means? 9. Latin word for 9. Do you know what December means?
10.
10. Dessa. 10. So October, November, December in the original calendars. In the Roman calendars, October, November, December meant the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th month. That makes sense, doesn't it? That even in the beginning, they understood that a new year wouldn't begin in the middle of winter. That signifies death of everything. That a new year would be signaled by new life, just as Yahweh instructed in Exodus 12. So they understood that October, November, December were the 8th, 9th, and 10th month. Also notice that in the beginning when they referred to months, they referred to them by numbers. You hear October, they heard 8. You hear November, they heard 9. You hear December, they heard 10. They were saying in the 8th month, in the 9th month, in the 10th month. Well, that's the way Yahweh first established for it to be known. You had the first day, the second day, the third day, the fourth day, the fifth day, the sixth day, the seventh day, and then the first day, the second day, the third day. He called days by numbers. And he called months by numbers. The first month, the second month, and so on. And he called years by number. Listen to this. I'm going to read to you out of Genesis 7:11. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were open. So the days, the months, and the years were all identified by numbers, not names. And evidently, in the Roman calendar in the beginning, it was the same way. The 8th month, the 9th month, the 10th month. Our present day calendar reveals that this practice continued for a long, long time. But then in 45 BC, Julius Caesar commissioned that a new calendar be established. And in establishing this new calendar, he kept the old names of October, November, December. You and I now, without even thinking about it, refer to them as 10th, 11th, and 12th month. When the very name of them says 8, 9, 10, we think 10, 11, and 12. And it's all because in 45 BC, he instituted that a new calendar, the Julian calendar, be established. And when he established this new calendar, he determined, decided, decreed that the next month after December would be January, and that January, the first day of January, would be the beginning of a new year. A new year is supposed to start in the spring when everything's coming back to life. But now the new calendar states that the new year is January, which would have originally been the 11th month. Do you know what January means? Say it out loud if you do. Anybody know what January means?
11.
It doesn't mean 11, but that's exactly what, that's a good guess. That's what there probably was one there at one time that meant 11. But January means the month of Janus. Janus. Janus is the Roman god of beginnings, of gates, of transitions, of time, of doorways, of passages, and of endings. He's usually depicted as having two faces, not like, what was it, Two-Face in Batman. No, not that way. But a face in the front and a face in the back. So he could see what was past and so that he could see what was coming. Now do you understand why people declare January 1 to be a new year? Now do you understand why they begin to declare New Year resolutions? They look back at the past and see things that need to be changed, and they look forward in the future and they resolve to make those changes. Every bit of these rituals are traced back to the worship of Janus. Some of them even trace back to Babylon, where it was believed that in the beginning of a new year, that you could make promises to the gods about how you would change so that you could bring blessings and benefit into your life as you move forward into a new year. When they participate in a January 1 celebration, they're connecting themselves to a real entity. That's the point. Not fake, not an imaginary being, a real entity. And they're performing acts of worship toward Him when they sit up till midnight, when they make New Year resolutions, when they say Happy New Year, when they eat superstitious meals. This is how powerful Satan is at deception. He gets people to ignore what the Bible says, has them engage in worship of Him without them even knowing they're doing it. When this is pointed out to the deceived, they immediately respond, I'm not worshiping Satan and I'm not worshiping Janus. I'm thanking God for a new year. Well, the point is, you cannot thank the Creator of the heavens and the earth, the one who so loved you that He gave His only begotten Son. You cannot thank Him for a new year in January when He explicitly said in Torah that this shall be the first month, the head of the year to you. And He's referring to the month where the barley is in the Abib stage, which is spring. The deceived say, I'm not worshiping Satan or Janus. I'm just enjoying hanging out with my friends. It's fun. Well, go back to Genesis 3 and see that that's exactly how Satan got the woman in the garden to rebel. She knew that she was forbidden to eat of the fruit of that tree, but she listened to Satan and then she reasoned in her heart, and it says that she saw that the fruit of that tree was good for food and pleasant to the eyes. What could possibly be bad about eating it if it's good for food and pleasant to the eyes? Why would Yahweh say not to eat something that's edible and looks delicious? That's what she said. Why would Yahweh tell me not to eat something that it's clear it's edible and it's delicious? And so, deceived in her own heart, she ate. Well, that's how He works. Participating in January 1 festivities looks harmless and it looks fun. Why would Yahweh forbid me to do that? Because in a deceived heart and in a darkened mind, you don't understand what you're doing. You're participating in rites and rituals associated with a fallen angel. In order to participate in it, you have to do exactly what the woman did in the garden. You have to ignore what Yahweh said about the new year. You have to ignore His command to not participate in pagan rituals. And you have to allow your reasonings and your heart to decide what you should and shouldn't do. Is that not what the woman did? She let her darkened heart decide what she should and shouldn't do instead of just obeying Yahweh. And that, my friends, is the very definition and the very picture of what it means to be deceived. If a person wants to check themselves for the ticks of deception, it's real easy to do. All you got to do is read Torah. And every time you read something in Torah to see if you've been taught to ignore it, reject it, or violate it, you will find out whether you've been deceived or not. If you're reading Torah and you run across something, and when you read it, you think, well, I've been taught that that doesn't apply to me. I've been taught that that doesn't matter. I've been taught that I don't have to do that. That is your clue. You've been deceived. If you've been taught to ignore it, reject it, or violate it, then take the time to look at it and see why you might have been deceived into doing it. Listen, what I just said is very important. If you read something in Torah, and when you read it, and when I talk Torah, I'm talking about the first 5 books of the Bible. When you read something in Torah, and you see something, and you think to yourself, I've been taught that I can reject that, ignore that, and violate that. Pause for just a moment and ask yourself this question. Why would I have been taught to ignore that? And you should be shocked to find out that without even knowing it, you were deceived into ignoring what was written so that you could be led into acts of worship of Satan and his fallen angels. Again, just a couple of quick examples. By ignoring Exodus 12's declaration of when the new year is, a person is deceived into believing that the new year starts in the middle of winter, and they participate in activities associated with a real living entity, and they find themselves worshiping Satan, and they don't even know that's what they're doing. Leviticus 23 lists the holy appointed times of Yahweh. You got Sabbath, you got Passover, you got unleavened bread, you got first fruits, you got Shavuot, you got trumpets, you got the Day of Atonement, and you got Sukkot. They're all listed right there in Leviticus 23. When a person gets deceived into ignoring those, rejecting those, and violating those appointed times, they've got to first reject that as being applicable, as meaning anything. But when they are deceived into believing that they don't have to do those things, now it's real easy for Satan to deceive them and draw them into Sunday worship. It's easy to draw them into Christmas and Easter and Valentine and Halloween and Lent and all of the things associated with these things. Every one of those celebrations has activities that are linked to real live entities who promote themselves as gods, who promote themselves as deities that are to be worshiped. So the first thing that Satan has to do is deceive you into believing you don't have to keep Torah. When he deceives you in the belief you don't have to keep Torah, then he can draw you into other activities where he himself gets worshiped. By rejecting Torah, many people participate in the worship of these false gods without knowing they are worshiping fallen angels. Deuteronomy 18. Yahweh states that divination, observers of times, enchanters, witches, charmers, consulters with familiar spirits, wizards, necromancers are all abominations to him, and he forbids them to be used, consulted, or tolerated. But if a person is deceived into ignoring Deuteronomy 18, then they are led into activities that lead to the worship of living beings that promote themselves as God. They're led into horoscopes and fortune telling and palm readings and magic and wizards. And as we saw last week, the official title of all who can practice these dark arts are magi or magicians. And there are Magians who came to Bethlehem in search of Messiah. Yahweh did not send them. Satan sent them. I'm going to go over that again with you just real quick. Here's how we know that Yahweh did not send these Magians, called wise men in King James. First of all, Yahweh never uses the stars to make known His passage when He wanted to make known His message. When He wanted to make known His message to the shepherds, He sent His angels. He would never call Magians abominations in Deuteronomy 18 and then use them in Matthew 2. He would never send the Magians and not tell them where Messiah was. In order for the Magians to find the Messiah, they had to go to crooked priest and to Herod to find out where the Messiah was. He would have never sent the Magians knowing that children in Bethlehem would be slaughtered as a result of their visit. And yet, because Deuteronomy 18 is rejected, not only do church-going people feel like it's okay to read their horoscopes and find delight in Harry Potter and watch television shows where people supposedly talk to the dead, but they also seek to celebrate the birth of the Messiah by giving a place of honor to Magians in their worship of the Messiah. One more example and I'll close. Leviticus 11 lists what Yahweh says is food and what He says is not food. The deceived are taught by Satan to ignore, reject, and violate what's written in Leviticus 11. They do just what the woman in the garden did. They reason in their hearts and they say, but it's edible and delicious. It's something to be desired. And the command of Yahweh gets trivialized. And the deceived with darkened hearts and minds consume the forbidden with delight as if it is a sign of their rebirth. And they know not that it is the number 2 sign that a person has rejected Yahweh as being the true Elohim. Search the scriptures. Search history. And you will see that the number 1 sign and the number 2 sign that a person rejects Yahweh as being Elohim are these. The number 1 sign that a person rejects Yahweh as being Elohim is that they reject the 7th day as being Sabbath. The number 2 sign that a person rejects Yahweh as being the only true Elohim is that they reject all dietary laws. When a person rejects the Sabbath and embraces the sun's day as a day of worship, they have rejected Yahweh as being the true Elohim. And when a person rejects Leviticus 11 and consumes that which is forbidden, they have been deceived into acts of defiance and rejection of Yahweh as Elohim. We just got through talking about a couple of weeks ago Antiochus Epiphanes, who was determined that the whole world would worship Zeus and the entire pantheon of the Greek gods. What 2 things did he require to prove that a person was going to worship Zeus and the entire pantheon and reject Yahweh as being the only true Elohim? What 2 things did he require? He made the Sabbath illegal, and he required everybody to eat pig. Those 2 things. There are no insignificant commands in Torah. None. And to ignore the slightest of them is to be deceived by Satan and to be led into acts of defiance that reject Yahweh as Elohim and that exalt Satan and his fallen angels as being gods. And the only way a person can examine themselves to see if they are free of deception is to be willing to examine everything they believe against what Torah actually says. If a person rejects Torah, they will be deceived. Period. That's the reason Satan's ministers tell people not to read the Old Testament. Because if a person rejects Torah, they will be deceived. And once a person is deceived, they will worship Satan and his angels, and most of the time be unaware that that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
Stand up. When do we reach a place where we can stop checking ourselves? Never. I like what Zachary Bauer says. We are all new to Torah. And we always need to make ourselves aware of that. We are new to Torah. And that's the reason, because Satan is so skilled at accomplishing his goal of being worshiped through deception, because he's so skilled at it. That's the reason when Yahweh gave us Torah, he said, you shall teach these things diligently to your children. When they rise up and when they sit down, you shall make it as a frontlet between your eyes and on your hands and on your arms. You shall be aware of it day and night. You'll talk of it when you are out in the street. You'll talk of it when you sit down at night. You must reaffirm to yourself what Torah says, because if you don't, you will be deceived. Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yahweh lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. As his name is put upon you, so shall he bless you.